All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our presentation today, New Year, New Team Dynamics. My name is Kate Genser. I am on the marketing team here at LHH and will be helping to facilitate our conversation today. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. I will be sending out a copy of the presentation along with a recording and any related materials we talk about, including the study that a lot of this work is based upon. We have built in time to answer questions, so please do participate via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We do want this to be a somewhat informal dialogue and give you an opportunity to ask questions of these experts who have seen it all in navigating effective teams. So please do enter into the Q&A box. Now, typically, I would hand this over to Stephanie Sloan, who is our LHH North American Director of Solutions Consulting, but she is having technical difficulties, as I mentioned. So I am going to hop over and allow our speakers for today to introduce themselves and give us just a quick background on what you've done and what brought you to us here today. Dominic, why don't you go first?
Yep. So welcome, everyone. My name is Dominic Scafidi, and I'm a coach, an executive coach. And yeah, my background is in organizations. I was in, and it's a 20-year corporate career in organizations before moving into coaching. And I've been doing strictly coaching for over 15 years. And prior to that, I was in fairly large global organizations. I had started in line roles, sales and marketing and those kinds of roles. And then ultimately I moved into human resources, organizational effectiveness, team effectiveness, working with teams and organizations. And that eventually led to coaching and then team coaching and that kind of work. So that's how I got here.
Thanks so much, Dominic. And Connie, over to you.
Sure. Yeah, very similar to Dominic. I have a long career, over 20 years, in individual leadership development, executive coaching, as well as working with teams. And I think my work with teams, when I think back, really started in early 2000. I was working with a team that was actually part of a large research study. And so as we get into some of the concepts and data around team effectiveness and how it really contributes to organizational performance, I can share some of that as well. So I look forward to it.
Awesome. Stephanie, over to
Yes.
you.
Hi, everyone. I had a little technical glitch there, so glad I'm back. But very nice to meet you all. Welcome to the webinar today. I'm Stephanie Sloan. I am the head of solution consulting for North America and manage our leadership development group. So very happy to be here and well, again, welcome and thanks for spending the next hour with us. I'm really thrilled that Connie and Dominic are here. They're going to have some just wonderful insights and lessons learned and tips and tricks and guidelines to share with you as we think about how to support teams in this challenging time. Of course, as we all know, I'll share a little bit more data about what's going on with teams from some of our research from last year, and will be very helpful as we lead into this session. So we'll jump ahead there. Thanks, Kate. All right, excellent. So what you're going to see, or what you'll hear from Connie and Dominic, they'll share some of their typical scenarios, lessons learned, again, as I said, and even some unique challenges that they faced when working with teams. Some of you may be leaders that have your own teams, and so we can give you some ideas on how to create an effective team, what you can do as a leader, and also how to engage team members in team development activities if you need that strong, of course, as you need that strong participation. So we'll get to all of that in just a moment, and then we'll have some live Q&A. But would love to give you a little bit of a framework as we jump into this in the beginning about our research and what we've learned over the last year partnering with the Corporate Research Forum in really trying to understand team effectiveness and what really leads to high-performing teams and what's getting in their way. And so what you'll see here is the changes that are happening within teams today. So teams are becoming much more complex, as many of you might realize and experience yourself. We're sitting on more teams. There's more people in teams. We have more meetings, all of those things that are happening around us as we're working on teams. And so the complexity has just increased significantly. So it just reinforces how much support that we need to be giving to teams and kind of wrap our arms around them and be very intentional about what really can support that team being effective and all the things that kind of go into that structure and supporting context that's necessary. So if we move to the next page, thank you. All right, so these are some pretty remarkable statistics that you'll see here. So as I mentioned before, increased time spent by managers and employees in collaborative activities. It can feel like collaborative overload maybe at times. And just at this other comment here, this other point, the number of meetings per person since March 2020, 150% increase, just remarkable. So we're spending a lot more times in meetings with teams. And so trying to really create teams that can work more effectively together is really critical, of course, at this time. So we'll move on. So based on our research with CRF over the last year, what we found was a lot of the key components of team effectiveness hasn't changed. So they still need a compelling purpose. They still need supportive structure. And that belonging piece is also really critical to ensure that teams feel like they're in it together. So we've kind of narrowed that down to kind of three buckets of what's really kind of three pillars of that drive team success. So that purpose is really that we're all in it together, reaching for this shared vision of what we can achieve that we can only achieve collectively. We can't achieve it alone. So having that driving sense of a purpose and direction is really critical. The belonging, of course, is trust and psychological safety. So we've got to feel like we can, I guess I would say, depend on the people that are around us and that we can take those risks as needed and be supported. And then that drives us into agility. So agility is really able to pivot within a team. All the changes that are happening around us, we need to be able to say, all right, what's working, what's not? How do we shift our approach as needed? And again, take those risks and try something different as we experience this kind of complexity in the world today. Okay, thank you for that, Kate. All right, so we'll turn it over to a poll.
All right, we like to kick it off with a poll to get a sense of how things are going. So what, on your current team, what is the key area of strength? And we picked these choices based on kind of what we've seen out in the field. So what is going well right now? I'm going to wait until we get to a critical mass. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Okay. Now I'm sharing the results, and it looks like folks have strong belonging on their teams and lower on the safety to take risks. On the other side of the spectrum, let's look at the opportunities for improvement. We will probably see it as the inverse of what we just saw. Safety to take risks, that can be tough. Yeah, and so we do see the inverse of the last. So, it sounds like people do have a really close team, but perhaps the safety to try new things is lacking.
Thank you for that, Kate. Wonderful. All right, so this is really what we all came here to listen to, is really hearing from Dominic and Connie about all their experience working with teams and driving team effectiveness. And so I'll start off the questions. And again, feel free to put something in the chat if you have a question. So let's start with typical scenarios, Connie and Dominic. When you're called in to help support a team, what are you normally facing with that team, and what seems to be the commonalities across teams that are struggling? And Dominic, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it was interesting because I think on the poll, when you looked at potential opportunity areas, that clarity and alignment also, like that, those ones came up as potential, and that often is the case. So the relationships, oftentimes the relationships can be good, but the reason that where the safety sometimes can become the issue potentially is because people are unclear, and so they don't want to disappoint, or they start to get hesitant. So that clarity, that alignment can be an issue, and so oftentimes it's easy, kind of low-hanging fruit to clear it up. It's common sense if you think about yourself, if you were even on a team where you didn't know anybody, and imagine you're in a life and death situation, like you're somewhere in a wilderness and you're in a life and death situation, and a group, it would just be a group, you're not even a team, and suddenly you must survive. You would find yourself very cohesive. And why is that? Because it is so clear what must happen, or it will impact all of you. It's so clear what must happen. So that sense of strong purpose and alignment solves many of these issues. The role clarity part is often a confusion, which then creates conflict, which then creates, lack of safety, like that. And that's also common. So for some reason, there's not, it can show up as one person. We think this one person is the problem. And so there's conflict often, and that comes from not understanding each other. The person's not the problem. They just have a different perspective and a different way of looking. And so again, easily cleared up, but yeah, like that. So those are a few things that really show up.
Thank you, Dominic. Connie?
Yeah, and Dominic, I just to follow up on the teams that may have one person that seems like, they're a problem, is actually, there's research out there that says that actually having someone who is viewed as a problem is actually an indication of a team that actually has access to more resources, and it's actually a good thing. But the challenge is, right, that you need a team that knows how to leverage the views, and that having a naysayer, how do you make sure that those come out, but it's not disruptive of the team. And I think that that's, been my experience, is a lot of times when we get called in, it's because, there is some issue with the team, right? There's either, people aren't getting along, or there's someone disruptive, or they're just not, reaching their potential. And so I always, try to distinguish between where there's maybe a dysfunctional, and there's lots of ways that, we can talk about how that's defined, but a dysfunctional team that just is trying to deal with the dysfunction, and oftentimes we get caught in to deal with those issues, which are probably more basic. And then oftentimes it's more of the good to great, I find, where, it's there, the team has some of the underlying elements of wanting to be on the team. But to your point about clarity of purpose, I almost always find that even when there's a clear statement about, or a team charter, it really hasn't been internalized or translated into what are the implications of our team purpose. If it's survival, it's pretty clear what the implications are. Well, maybe not. It's not clear what everyone's roles are, but it's clear that what we collectively we want to survive, right? If we're collectively on a team and we're so used to being told to do our job, our non-team job, our day job, or whatever you want to call it, right? Then when we get together as a team, are we still in that role or are we in a different role? And that's what I find a lot of times resolving a lot of those clarity issues can really help a team move to the next level.
That's great, Connie. And thought about like breaking down those silos, right? Putting on more of that enterprise hat, right? Versus maybe your functional role, especially when you're in cross-functional teams and being able to contribute more broadly. So thank you for that. So you talked a lot about clarity of roles and clarity of purpose. What other things do you see as driving team effectiveness?
Well, I think one thing is, maybe it's obvious, but the leader's emotional intelligence or lack thereof. I mean, I'm just going to kind of put that out there. I mean, we are going to talk more about the team and how it works together. But I would say that it's necessary but not sufficient, right? So, you need some baseline, and if not, then how does the team then help a leader who might not have that? And I think that one of the things that I was thinking about is just in one example where it just didn't go as well as it should have in my work with a team, and what made it so difficult to kind of put in place a lot of these best practices that we know about. And it was a leader who really lacked, self-awareness as well as knowledge of how, in this case it was a he, how he was coming across to others. So that's one thing that kind of comes to mind. And I think also just not having, mechanisms for people to have a voice, which gets back a little bit to the safety issue that kind of came out. It's not just permission, but it's actually, it's critical to get the voices out. So I think having ways of, processes built in as well as norms that give people a voice.
I love that. Dominic, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would speak to the dynamics, which is then, I mean, they're all so connected, but the relationships, the connection, it's amazing what can be solved or dissipated in strong connections and relationships because there's deeper understanding of each other, which you would say, well, on a team without that kind of understanding, boy, that action or that comment in the meeting could have derailed the whole thing. But in strong relationships, strong connection, well, that comment was taken. It was understood. It was understood as intended. The player on the team was understood as coming well-intentioned from a good place. And what's funny about that is that it allows greater freedom for people to be themselves and not have to show up appropriately or how they need to show up. They can be authentic. They can take their position and it is valued and understood. And so that kind of dynamic, and what's great from a competitive advantage point of view, is that kind of dynamic is very hard to replicate. In other words, everybody can copy your structures, your ways of doing role clarity and assigning all tracking accountability. Everyone can copy that. But how do you copy this atmosphere or environment? How do you copy the feeling that is on this team? That's very hard to copy because you can't get at what's causing it. Like, how did it get to be that way? And so there's a lot of competitive advantage if you can do something with that.
And I think too, just to build on that, how you talked about the amount of time that's spent in meetings. And I think helping a team think about what is the best use of our time together. And part of that comes from the clarity around what is the purpose of the team. If we are a team that needs to actually solve problems and make decisions, then are we making the best use of our time together? And oftentimes there's a lot of teams spend times in meetings and they're just reporting, or they're multitasking, right? They're not really in there as one. So oftentimes it's very helpful to just say, do we need to spend all of this time? And if we do, how do we spend it so that it is productive and it's helping us? And I think back to competitive advantage, anytime that you're spending more time on the stuff that really matters, link back to the purpose, it will help the team improve its effectiveness.
We had a question that I wanted to throw out to everyone about generational differences. So the benefits of having diversity on teams, cannot be denied at this point with the research, with age and ethnicity and thinking styles and all of that. But the question asks, I see generational differences among team members on how they see their roles and responsibilities. Any insight on how you deal with 5 generations in the workforce and how they can better relate to each other?
Well, I mean, I'll just start out. I mean, I think that you're right. The diversity of the views and the ways of just looking at things and thinking about things and interacting is such an advantage. And I think it's, with any sort of diversity that you have, that it is important that everyone respect and not assume or judge. And there's, I know there's a lot of humor around the differences in generations from, everything, right? To how they look at times for meetings, to breaks, and how they work, and I mean, you name a topic and differences. But, the reality is that that's where innovation comes from. And so, and I think we have to get out of this, well, because people have more experience, or they're in higher level roles, then they know more. And this gets back to all the voices being heard, and making sure that, that all the ideas kind of come out and get on the table, and that they're not judged or evaluated in that, oh, that's just because this person or generation prefers it that way. But where can we really get some new ideas by putting all the ideas together?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many manifestations of these different ways, the variety of perspectives that we bring. And it's, I'm not sure that it's useful in the categorizations. It's, this generational issue compared to, the way people look, or backgrounds, or whatever. And when you start to do that, then there's a problem to solve in a particular way here, which is different than the problem to solve. But to some degree, you could say the essence of all of it is the unique perspective that we each hold. And what a surprise that there are no two of us standing in the same place. Such a surprise, right? So it's not possible. It isn't anything that we will ever resolve. And why would we resolve that? That's also the great advantage we have, is that there are no two of us standing in the same place. And so then the competitive advantage becomes, what do you do with this? Because from a lack of understanding, you will attribute negative intention, and the path you'll go down is to eradicate this diversity, eradicate this difference, and let's move towards sameness. And sometimes in a very confused attempt to say, well, we all have to have shared values, and we've got a shared mindset, and but it's a bit confused, because are you talking sameness, or are you talking a same core expressed in infinite ways? It can get confused, right? But all of the value is going to be in that difference and that diversity. And then, then what's team effectiveness? How do we bring understanding? Because if you bring understanding and appreciation for it. Now you can use it. Now you can leverage it. In the absence of understanding and appreciation, you will want to eliminate it because it is unproductive, right? Yeah.
Interesting.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for that. There's another question in the chat that I also think is very interesting. So what are the primary indicators that you typically examine to determine team dysfunction? And then I guess there's a follow-up question to that. When there's a team issue or challenge, when does it become a dysfunction? I guess when is it really kind of broken down into a dysfunctional team?
If I go at, we use, obviously we all use core models based on research and all of that, but all of us coaches will have different slants and angles, right? Based on our approaches, right? And one thing for sure is I'm not that interested in dysfunction. I'm not that interested in how the team's problems. Those are what spark even the labeling of a dysfunction. You couldn't even identify it were it not for an aspiration that's been thwarted. Were it not for a desire that has been blocked or interfered with, you couldn't even come up with you couldn't conceive of dysfunction. So the very language of dysfunction contains within it the aspiration for what is wanted. In my, when I look at that, I want 100% of our time and attention on creating what we aspire to. And when you shift the team's attention into the creation of what is wanted, you tap into an energy and a spirit. This is where engagement comes from, and where you're able to create an alignment. When you begin to analyze and dig into dysfunction, what you get is a pushback and a justification for why all of the positions are what they are. Well, it isn't me, it's them. It's not my function, it's that function. And so the more you probe into it and try to get to the bottom of it, you find there is no bottom. You will find dysfunction everywhere you look for it. And the more you look for it, the more of it you will find. And it will expand as you continue to give it attention. So I'm interested in where the team is working. And that dysfunction is highlighting an aspiration. And let's now spend a lot of time on what we aspire to and begin to create how we put that together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I was just thinking about how to answer that question. And then I think you're right. A lot of times we do get called in and teams are labeled dysfunctional, or people will say, I'm part of one, or I see one. And I like to do observation of the team. I think it's really, to your point. And oftentimes what I'll see is that teams that are labeled dysfunction, they don't know what to do with the people and the stuff. So, they can aspire obviously to do better with bringing out ideas and managing conflict, et cetera. But teams that are actually oftentimes not labeled as dysfunctional because they're more harmonious or they get along doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, oftentimes means that they're not even where they need to be because they're not bringing out the stuff and everybody's just going along to get along. So what I look for when I do a lot of the observation is, just to look for to what extent are people willing to challenge, assumptions. And this, because even with the generational question, I was thinking about one of the things that's been most helpful for me, as someone who's been in the workforce for a long time and is part of the older generation, is these commonly held beliefs that we've never challenged, that someone will challenge it. And it catches me so off guard sometimes. I don't know I'm just like, what did you just say? And sometimes, effective teams, they will do that. They would be like, oh my gosh, like no one has ever disagreed, or it's just such a known to us, right? So what I look for is, are people just, this gets back to the trust, right? Are they open? Are they transparent in their own way? And are they willing to look at themselves? Now, sometimes the dysfunction, to use that word how it typically is used, is because people are doing it, but they're doing it in a way that feels very offensive to other people. And so, there's always ways, and this gets back to the, setting of norms, which is often done. It's like, how do you want to encourage that behavior? But how do you set norms that people are comfortable with? What does it really look like? And how to recognize if you're on the other side and you've said something that appears to offend someone, to just say, I didn't mean for that to be offensive. I know it probably sounded offensive, but it's, can we just talk about the subject matter, because I think it could take us to a different place. Like if someone just said something like that in a meeting, that's what I kind of look for, is, are there elements of those things that people do, or are they just too, they don't comment? And even worse is when you've got people, have you ever, I'm sure you've seen this, where they're actually having conversations, their own conversation with themselves, and somebody takes it someplace else, and then they answer their own question, because it's very disconnected. But is that dysfunctional? I think, to your point, Dominic, it's all opportunities, right, to do things better.
Thank you both. So there's another question in the chat. So I'll answer this one from my perspective, but also open to what you both think on this one. So Astrid asked, how does safety to take risk fit into the team effectiveness model? Is it in agility? And what are activities to address a low score in this area? So again, that's a great question, because it kind of can be underscored by all three from my perspective. So if you think about your purpose, and I've seen teams do this, they've built in that safety to take risk within their purpose, like as they're creating that team charter, or they're like, why are we here? What can we collectively achieve that no other team can? They call it out, right? That we want to be pioneering, we want to take risks, we want to innovate. And so it gives them that, I guess, freedom to do so, that it's agreed upon within the team. But then you also have to have that belonging, that trust, that psychological safety, that that I feel that we're all going to do the best that we can, and that we're going to support each other. And so if you feel that belonging and trust and safety, that will easily contribute to people feeling like they can take a risk. And but then the agile part, which is the other piece, right, is that you're able to pivot, so that you're able to kind of step back, reflect, to say what's working, what's not, what do we need to change? Do we need to try different methodology, a different approach? And be able to adjust as needed as you're learning from that pivot and change, that maybe that wasn't the perfect, outcome that you were looking for, or the perfect solution, but then you're modifying that along the way. So it kind of can be underscored by all three of those areas in my mind. And activities, I would say, really thinking about and giving the team space to reflect, brainstorm, how do we do things differently? And then support things if they don't go the right way, right? That it's okay. There's no blaming of someone on the team, but also, actually cheerleading that they took a risk and tried something different. So, Connie, Dominic, anything that you'd add to that?
I think the thing in risk, it is the contextualization on a team of that when you're interested in growth. So you're interested in growth, which then means learning, right? And so when contextualized in it's essential to learning and the team expanding and becoming more effective. I mean, a very small, understandable example. It's a team and we operate this retail environment. Do we trust that this person would be able to set up a display however they want? If there is a refund to be processed and it's a little bit outside of policy, do they need approval, or do we just trust them to? So this is the kind of thing. Now, And we control it. We kind of say, well, I'm not going to allow a $10,000 refund without approval, but I'm easily going to allow a $100 refund. And then learning can happen, right? Because now that person can make these decisions and like that. So in that environment, when it's understood that risk is it is giving you something, which is learning and growth for the team, then it's like I don't know what it would be, like a fertilizer, like the thing that actually expands the team, and then it's embraced, and then taking the risks is perfectly safe because the way you assess it is, well, what did you learn? What did you learn? And then and we applaud you for the learning, as opposed to, that really you shouldn't have done it that way. You should have done it this way, in which case you'll never try that again, right?
Thanks, Dominic.
Yeah, and I think for me too, it's when you talk about safe feeling, like having a safe environment to take risk, is what are the underlying barriers? Like what's getting in the way of the team feeling that it's safe? And there's oftentimes a lot of reasons, right? People are afraid to take the risk or even suggest things that might be outside the norm for fear of whatever, looking stupid, fear of failing, fear, that it won't be accepted, or just lack of information, right? I don't have enough to comment on this. So my idea might be a great one, but I don't know. It's probably already been tried. There's a whole slew of reasons that people don't feel safe taking risks in their own jobs or within a team, really kind of being innovative, right? Like that's how innovation really comes about. And, I think that to some extent you have to, this is getting a little bit related to another point, but you have to let people know, whether you're the leader of a team or a member of a team, when a topic comes up, where are we? What are we supposed to do with this topic? And this is kind of leading from an experience that I recently had with a team where the leader was a very goal-driven individual, as they often are. There was one team member that would consistently, want to do things differently. So, and again, was recommending some things or wanting to do some things that were more risky, right? So, person was very comfortable bringing it up, but oftentimes it would get completely dismissed. Say, nope, we've got a deadline. We're goal focused. We're going in this direction. I think that one of the ways that you can build that culture or environment is by letting people know that at this time we have a huge problem to solve or a huge opportunity that we have, and we need all ideas, and we're going to spend this meeting, we're going to delve into this topic, and I want the craziest of ideas. So back to norms and processes, especially if you're someone who's very goal oriented and wants to, divert on a topic very quickly, is know that about yourself and set the environment where people know it's time to, be creative. So it kind of gets back to, you set the climate. What is the climate? And then if the climate is not one where people naturally lean in, take risks or are innovative, how do you set the conditions? And you can really change team dynamics very quickly just by setting different conditions. Oftentimes that's what a facilitator does, is just changes the conditions for this particular meeting. And leaders can do that too at any point they want. They can set a different tone or conditions.
I love that, Connie. And that leads me to another question I wanted to ask of, like, what do you see with leaders that are creating that right team environment? So you don't have an external coach or facilitator. What are those team leaders that are really doing it right? What are they doing that's different?
For me is so that they have a lot of a self-awareness or understanding to take an initial trigger and to see within it what what's well-intentioned or what's good or what's the value in there, and then some kind of an ability to then include it on the team. I had a team recently where there was this like just amazing organization with incredible results and growth. And so that, but then you'd have to say, there's questions in here about dysfunction. Wow, talk about some dysfunction. And how do you do that? Because it was incredible growth and success. And then, but there was some of this dysfunction. And it had to do with this, where the leader and the sort of, right-hand person. The reason this was so good is, one of them had a particular kind of approach to things, and the other one had a completely opposite approach to it, which there was the dysfunction, but also this was why this organization was so successful. They actually, kind of brought us in because of the problem, right? Thinking there was a problem to solve. But it really was a matter of the value of, what an incredible organization that they could, you had this visionary leader who could see things. They could see over that hill. They could see around that mountain. And immediately right next to them was this person who had this talent and ability to see every step. It's like every step and how you would staff it and structure it and all this. It was incredible. But the conflict was horrible. And so about to self-destruct. But it was literally that of a, don't you see, there's a very different perspective this person has. And what the conflict looked like was, they slow us down. They're not visionary. I'm trying to bring this organization to the next level, and they're like an anchor that sort of drags and keeps us in the past, and like that. And meanwhile, if you just looked at it outside, it was like, oh my God, this is what marriage made in heaven here. this is perfect. And so then it was simple because it wasn't about the dysfunction. It was about understanding and increasing understanding and showing the value of that. But they did, really what Connie was talking about. You had to have clarity about what we're doing. They'd get into conflict in certain environments and conversations because they actually had no idea what the conversation was that they were having. One person's listening one way to operationalize, the other person's talking about the vision, and it was just wonderful to sort of see the sparks fly, but not very productive. So that was the yeah.
This seems to be like a common question, things that we run into around this psychological safety piece to take risks. So one person wrote, how do you support teams that operate in an environment where there is that low psychological safety? So they could be more courageous and innovative, but they also are kind of worried about those adverse effects that could happen along the way. So again, we hear this a lot, I think, with clients that are, want to be more innovative, but all of that cultural history where, there may have been negative consequences from that is just, and that's the story that's being told over and over again. How do you change that?
I mean, there's so many facets to it, right? I mean, there's, first of all, does the leader want to change it, or do the team members want to change it? I mean, that's kind of the first question. And do the members and or the leader know how to drive a discussion where people feel that they can take, well, not even safe risks, just take some risks, right? And so oftentimes it's reframing the thinking and defining the purpose, right? It does always come back to what's the problem we're trying to solve, or what's the opportunity that we have, and then why are people not feeling safe? And if you frame it in terms of an opportunity, right? We've got lots of opportunities to do this. And you can do this, by the way, even if you're a team member. You don't have to be, if you're a team member who feels like, I really want to step out and take some risk. And I feel like we should be doing more of this. And I would like for the team to be engaged in this, is just to be able to, introduce some concepts, reframe thinking. I mean, I know one of the concepts that, we use is just the using what if statements, right? There's ways that you can say, do we have a moment, or can we set an agenda item for the next meeting? To just, we've been talking about this problem for a year now. We've tried a lot of things, but if we just had a discussion where we all just said, what if? And then, also the concept about just unlearning, right? Sometimes people, this gets back to the generational question. Sometimes people who have so much experience, it's a detriment because they go back to what's worked in the past, as opposed to saying, let me solve this with a fresh mind. So, I mean, that's one way that I've seen cultures change. And ideally, you've got an intentional process coming from the leader or an influential team member that says, we really need to step out of our comfort zones. Is everyone else, what does everyone else think? And oftentimes people will say, yeah, I kind of agree. We need to do it. So that's probably the first step.
I think too that risk taking and safety, right, so related. So I mean, if you think about, and I'm only using this metaphor because I've actually been doing some work in a client, more than one, where it's about early childhood learning, and education, childcare, like that. So risk, right, and learning, right? So learning and risk together. So what is done in that environment, and what can leaders learn about that? You create the safety. Really, it's about sandbox. So you have the sandbox, and then it goes that way. So we sort of know what's non-negotiable, or what, you can play over here, and then there's a border around it. And then there's a freedom inside of it. And now everybody's comfortable. It was funny. I just really kind of heard some statements in that environment, again, because you'll have different cultures and perspectives within the environment. One statement I heard in the past couple of days was, one of the safest places or for a child to be is, they said one of the riskiest places for a child to be is up in a tree. And the other one is, one of the best places you could have a child is 5 feet up in a tree. Right? So both are true, but what conditions are you using? Because there's a lot of learning that goes on if you can provide the freedom where the child can climb a tree and look from up there. And there's a lot of learning that happens. But boy, if you're gonna allow that kind of risk, you have to have some very tight borders. And then you can allow that risk, and a lot of growth will happen, and a lot of learning will happen. So it's just a very thoughtful way to think about it. People then will feel safe, and a lot will happen. But yeah, so it's a balance of the two.
Yes, agreed.
It's back to that concept around, do I feel that other team members have my back? Right. And then that, to me, that's one of the best, kind of questions to really ask, to feel if they're safe. Because if you feel like others have your back and they're committed to your success, then oftentimes people are a lot more comfortable taking those risks. And, how do you create that? It's back to the, show some vulnerability, like tell people, I don't know that I know the way forward, whether I'm a team member or a leader, and I need your help. And oftentimes on teams, you hear a lot of people giving advice, versus asking others or admitting some of those, kind of vulnerabilities.
Great. Thank you for that. So this is kind of a last call for questions. So if you have any burning questions, please put them in the chat. Probably could do 2 more. I'll take one that's in the chat now. So how much attention do you see hiring practice promote fit decisions that are leaning towards the sameness on the team, or really actively identifying where there may be some gaps to increase diverse voices and perspectives? Any thoughts around that?
So the question, what are we seeing in terms of hiring and selection, or what should it be?
Yes, well,
Or both, right?
good question. Right. So are you saying that they tend to like go for the sameness, which I think a lot of times that's what you naturally do, versus really being intentional about adding people to the team for that diversity of perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, too much sameness is, well, I don't know. Like I said, challenge assumptions. But I think, there are probably some cases where sameness is good, but I think, if you're trying to drive innovation, then those differences kind of need to be there. But I think it also gets back to being strategic around what do you need? What are the capabilities that are needed on the team or in the organization strategically? So it gets back to, strategic thinking. I do, though, see a lot of assessments for selection being based on cultural fit, but I also, I think there's much more of a trend to say, how does, this role, or will this person complement the other members of the team or the organization? And so I think that is, really important. I think where there's a lack of, probably where maybe selection could do better, or development, is in helping then leaders know what do I do, how do I best manage, right, through what the advantages of a diverse team, and really be able to capitalize on what it brings.
This is interesting, because what you think you need may not be what you need. So there's a lot of logic that goes in, and people try to programatize it and create the models so that they can recruit or add to the team that way. And let's call that a living system. It will always get what it needs. It will always get what it needs. And so what I mean by that is, I worked with a team once where the leader was a particular way. And then the problem on the team was this one naysayer, let's call it, who was completely a blocker, apparently, right, of it. And so, from a selection perspective, you would say, that's the problem. And the leader did say this, had diagnosed the issue. And so as far as team is like, you get rid of the naysayer, you bring in someone else. But to their surprise, what the team needed, because this person was head in the clouds, too optimistically oriented, and that system required an anchoring down into reality. So to their surprise, as they brought this one in, that voice showed up elsewhere on the team. And that was bizarre, because it would appear as though they had solved their problem, but the team won't work unless that sort of grounding is there. And now, because this player was gone, the voice of this doubt started to show up in others. And so it gets expressed elsewhere. And so it creates other problems. So what you think you want is not always through that.
So one last question from Jan. How do you inspire a team to take ownership, to self-motivate, be creative in resolving their own roadblocks for doing a job well? So similar, I think, question we had about, like, how do you get teams really to participate in this process and take ownership for it?
I mean, oftentimes you'll see that whenever you're working with a team, that just talking about the team, some people will show up with, you can tell, they just think it's a total waste of time. Like, why are we even talking about this? So that's the first thing, I think, is helping people understand that there is value. And how do you do that? Well, you help them understand, that this is going to actually help me. What's in it for me, right? It's going to help me with my challenges. You will also get people who will show up and do a lot of complaining and take more of a victim mentality. So I think that, again, reframing the situation to focus on, we're going to actually talk about what we own as a team, what we can do, the kind of spheres of influence. You control yourself and you've got impact over others. And so that I found very helpful, as well as just, various exercises that are really focused around, what is it that we can do versus what's the context that we're operating within. And oftentimes, I think this is a process that leaders can do. They can help teams to kind of step back and go through a process. It's a way of driving innovation. It's a way of creating ownership. But ultimately, people have to care about my ideas, or I'm just going to say, well, if you don't listen to me. So the other thing that I think is so important is just curiosity. No matter what people say or where they're coming from, even if it feels like it's not from the right place, is just tell me more about that. How is that impacting you? And as soon as someone brings it up and it's dismissed, then you've hurt the chances of the person owning and bringing it up again.
Yeah, I'm surprised this one didn't come up more as dysfunction or as, an issue. Accountability is a huge reason also why we get brought in a lot. It's like my team, I need them more accountable. They're not accountable enough. And often the typical way of solving it is structures to control and command accountability. I'm going to hold them accountable, right? I need better systems to hold them accountable. We need to hold each other accountable. And it's sort of like, you don't have to hold each other accountable, right? When you hold them capable, when you have high expectation, right? And in a way, the simple metaphor on this one is if they're not accountable, there's something going on in the team where you don't expect it and you don't behave as if you expect it. And a simple metaphor, if you've worked with children or have your own children or are familiar with children, is why aren't they not clearing the table? I've told them and told them and told them, and they're old enough now to clear the table because they have common sense. They don't need to clear the table because you'll do it. So if they don't clear the table and they go play, you'll do it. I mean, who would clear the table when they can go play, right? So you just really don't expect it, and you don't expect them to do it well. So you're the problem. The accountability is not them, right? So.
Excellent point. Thank you, Dominic.
That's great. Yeah, it is time to wrap up. As you can tell, we're very passionate about this. Thank you, Connie and Dominic and Stephanie and everybody who joined us. As I mentioned, we will be sending out all of the materials related to today's conversation. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.